Hey everybody, welcome back to Jim's Garage. In this video, we're going to be looking at iGPUs. That's the integrated GPU that is part of many processors, especially the more sort of consumer space. Now, I have a number of devices here that are both Intel and AMD, and I want to test the notion of how much iGPU do you need. Now, I myself have been guilty in the past of saying just get an Intel GPU, it's easier, it's better supported, it's more performant. And whilst there is still some truth to that, I think we've got to the point where AMD have caught up. So I want to show you my very unscientific methodology that I've been using to try and prove that point. Now, people are probably thinking about this more from newer devices. I've just covered things like the MSA2 on my channel, and one of the questions that I've had, as well as my audience, is that enough to do things like Plex transcoding, Jellyfin, image, all of those sorts of things? Well, the good news is, I think so, yes, but there definitely are some caveats. The first thing we need to talk about really is what these iGPUs are, which CPUs they're found in, and also the actual basics of the iGPU itself. So there are things that are hard-coded into this, basically codec support, and that comes in the form of encoding and decoding. Let's have a look at what that means right after today's sponsor, Monday.com. Whether you're going solo, part of a small team, or even a large enterprise, things can get messy. Missed deadlines, missed emails, endless spreadsheets, and everything in between. That's where Monday.com can come in to help streamline your working. It's the work OS that brings your team, tools, and tasks together in one powerful platform. Start by building your perfect workspace with customizable boards. Whether you're tracking a product launch, onboarding new hires, or managing clients, you can tailor every column, view, and workflow to your needs. It's as flexible as your team is unique. Need to keep everyone aligned? No problem. Monday's built-in collaboration tools let you team assign tasks, leave comments, share files, and even tag each other, all in real time. Say goodbye to chasing updates. And when you're ready to save time, let automation do the heavy lifting. Set up triggers like, when a task is marked done, notify the team. It's simple, smart, and saves you hours. See your work like never before with visual workflows. Gantt charts for timelines, Kanban for status tracking, and calendar views to stay on schedule. Whatever your style, there's a view for that. Already using other tools? Perfect. Monday.com offers 200 plus integrations, from Slack and Zoom to Google Drive, Microsoft Teams, Salesforce, and more. Everything connected, everything in sync. So if you're ready to streamline projects, boost productivity, and bring clarity to your team, it's time to make the switch. Try Monday.com for free using the link on screen and in the description. So looking on this website here, we have an overview of what the 610M, that's the Radeon that's inside the MSA2, can do. Now, decoding is what's required for playing something. So if you're in Jellyfin or Plex, and let's say, for example, you have a file that's encoded with H.264 encoding, if you've got hardware acceleration on the GPU, that's going to decode much quicker. Now, the encoding is basically the opposite of that. It's when you're trying to create a file that is coded with H.264. Now, the good thing with H.264 is it's reasonably efficient and it's baked into pretty much all devices. But where it gets more interesting now is the move to H.265, both 8-bit and HDR 10-bit, but also as well, more recently, is AV1. Now, that's showed up here. And AV1 is probably going to be the new H.265. It's basically better at compressing, so you get smaller file sizes without having to lose any of the quality. Now, what we're showing on here is that most of these formats can actually be decoded and encoded, but modern things like the AV1 can only be decoded. So, for example, you can watch something in AV1, but you can't encode, i.e. you can't create a file in AV1. So if you're on Plex or Jellyfin and the file you want to play is AV1, but the TV, the mobile device, whatever it is you want to watch it on, i.e. the client, if that cannot understand AV1, it's going to have to transcode. Now, depending on how performant your GPU is, and obviously if you have a look here, you can see what you can encode into. So typically for an older client, you might have an AV1 file that you'll need to turn into something like H.264. Now, if we have a look over at the Intel site, now thankfully it's a bit easier to find the Intel stuff on the official website. And down here you can basically find all of your CPUs and then what codecs they support and also things like the bit depth, etc. Now, what's important here is when you're thinking about a home lab and the CPU you want, you need to think about, well, what's the bulk of your media and what's the bulk of your clients? There are other use cases. So for instance, I use my iGPU for Frigate. So that will be doing decoding, encoding of video files from CCTV. There's also things like image generation, AI stuff, things like image, for example. But I suspect most people will probably want this for some transcoding. Now, when talking about transcoding, we typically have two options. We have Intel and AMD. And broadly speaking, the QSV, the Intel QuickSync, is more performant than VARP, which is basically used by AMD, which is an open protocol. Now, there isn't a great deal of difference in them, and I'll show that later on, but there is a lot of variance in the testing I'm going to do. So I'm not trying to test out which is the most powerful iGPU. We can obviously just run a benchmark. This is more of a test of utility and making sure that you get enough iGPU for what you want to use. And spoiler alert, before we get into the actual testing methodology here, most of the AMD stuff is probably going to be good enough for what you want. Now, I haven't gone on to looking at the quality of the output, i.e. it looks good enough, but it might not be picture perfect, there might not be tone mapping, all of that sort of stuff. You'll have to decide. But I think for anyone who's transcoding, you just kind of want to watch this and you don't want the inconvenience of not being able to watch it. The actual quality of the output is probably less important. So what am I going to do in this video? Well, as you can see here, Jellyfin. I've spun up Jellyfin on all 4 of the machines I showed earlier. And I've also downloaded FFmpeg onto the devices as well. The FFmpeg is going to give more of a raw output, i.e. what can this transcode? And then the Jellyfin will give you more of, well, Jellyfin's interpretation of what settings it uses for FFmpeg, and ultimately, well, how many times can you do transcodes simultaneously? Now, quite handily, Netflix actually have some open source content for testing and playing around with video files. So these are some of the video files that I've used. I've used Big Book Bunny, and I've used that with H.265 4K, and the test I'll be doing for that is to transcode H.265 into H.264 1080p. So basically changing 4K to 1080 and also changing it from 265 to 264 because some older devices don't support H.265. I've then also tested an AV1 file, and then we're going to be turning that over into H.264, so that's just a change of the codec. And I've also got an H.264 file which we might want to just downscale as well, i.e. 4K down to 1080. So for testing, we'll be using this. Now, don't worry, I'm going to zoom in a minute when we do the individual tests. But effectively, what we have here is the MSA1, the MSA2, the B-Link, and the GCOM. So let's run a few of the tests that I mentioned before. I'll show you a couple of examples, and then we'll skip ahead straight to the output of all of those tests because there's no point in me showing you the same process over and over. So, for example, on the MSA1, if we do an ls here, you can see that I've got the Big Book Bunny file here, this Meridian file here, this one is a H.264, and then we've got this AV1 here, 10-bit HDR file in 1080p. So the first test I'm going to run is this one, and this is going to be using the AMD one. So let me just talk you through that quickly. Here you can see that we're using FFmpeg, we're using hardware acceleration using VARP. We're using the acceleration device of the default iGPU. I don't know whether that's actually needed, but I wanted to be explicit. The format's going to be VARP as well. The input file is going to be the Big Book 4K H.265. We're going to convert that to H.264, and we're going to create an output. So this is simply turning the 4K into a 4K but H.264. So if you've got an older client that's 4K but doesn't support H.265, this will be indicative of what's going to happen there. The command for the Intel is pretty similar, albeit we just need to change this to use QSV, so Quick Syncs Video, and that's basically the same thing. So when I hit return, that's now going to go away, and you can see that it's encoding this at about 1.3 times. Anything that's greater than 1, you should be able to do this in real time. Now, we will get onto Jellyfin in a little bit because I haven't dialed in the settings here. This is more just a raw performance, all with the same default settings. So actually what will happen in Jellyfin is it won't use the same quality settings here. So you'll actually probably be able to do more transcoding simultaneously. This is just trying to do a raw performance against one another. Now doing the same now with the B-Link, this is just a small N150. You can see that we're getting about the same speed as the MSA2. So this MSA2, which has an absolute monster CPU, you can see that the GPU in this tiny piddly little N150 is not too far off this one here. Now, you can see that actually what's happening here, after a while, that's gone down from 0.6 to a 0.4. So I don't know if there's anything to do with maybe the RAM constraints, something like that. Remember, this B-Link is a budget NAS. And finally, doing it for the last one we've got on the right, which is effectively the MS01. It's basically got the same iGPU. You can see here just behind my head that we're getting about 1.92, just shy of 2 times. So having a look at the raw performance here, it actually shows that the iGPU in the Intel at the 1.89, it is slowly dropping. This is the fastest iGPU for just raw transcoding. That's because it's using the QSV and the MSA1, which does have a more powerful iGPU. It's just the QSV is better or more performant for encoding, at least in the testing I've seen. We can also see that the MSA2 and the B-Link, that small N150, even though this MSA2 is significantly more powerful, the N150 isn't too far away from it. It is actually dropping a little bit the more I use it. Next, if we do a similar test, albeit this time we're turning the 4K into 1080p, let's see what happens. So now we're getting about 3.5 times on the MSA1. On the MSA2, that's down at about 1.5, 1.6. If we look at the little N150 in the B-Link, we're getting about 1 times. And then finally on the GCOM, which is very similar to the MS01, we're getting about 2.7 times. So bizarrely here, it looks as though the MSA1 is the fastest here. Maybe because that's using more of the CPU as well as the GPU, I'm not quite sure. We can see here on the top, it's only using 13% of this MSA1, and on here on the right, it's using about 26% of this CPU. Now again, this is just showing the raw throughput, but it does again suggest that you could get 2.5 simultaneous streams here, 3.5 over here, 1.5 over here, and basically half on the B-Link. Now I'm going to repeat this process for all of the other tests, and I'll show the results on screen at the end of it. After that, we're going to jump into Jellyfin and try and see how many simultaneous transcodings we can get going on. So after all the testing is finished, well, it's a bit of a mixed bag, but I would say it's pretty much good news as well. So if we have a look here, we can see the different tests that were run across the x-axis, and then across the y-axis, we'll see the times value that's associated with that test. So how many concurrent it could potentially do if you're watching it in real time. Now the key takeaway here is that the MSA1 is pretty good here with the 8700G. That does have the most powerful iGPU, that's 780M. But also of note is the MSA2, which does do pretty well considering it's got a weak GPU, possibly because it's got that beefy CPU to back it up in the background, and also the GCOM with that Intel Iris Xe, which is no surprise. We know that that is a good iGPU. Lastly, I'd probably say is the B-Link. That definitely seems to be the lowest performer consistently across the board. However, this is an N150. It's a budget chip that you can pick up for a very low price. So I would still say that that is enough to be able to do real-time transcoding. So if you want an absolute bare bones NAS with very low power, it's still probably a good option. And now, once we get onto Jellyfin, we can start to see that again, because as I said, this is just basically using the default raw parameters. I did that to keep it consistent across the board, but when we're doing transcoding in Jellyfin, it actually tweaks those settings and reduces some of the quality. So what that means is we should be able to get higher numbers through Jellyfin and its parameters versus the test that I've just done. Now for testing this, I've spun up Jellyfin on each respective machine in Docker with hardware pass-through. Now these aren't virtual machines, these are running bare metal just because I wanted to take any overheads out of the equation. Now I've got these tabs arranged in exactly the same order as previously, so we've got the MSA1 here, the MSA2 here, the B-Link here, and the GCOM. You can see here that video acceleration on both of the AMDs is set to VARP, and then for the respective Intels it's set to the QSV. I figured if it gives an advantage with an Intel chip, let's paint this in the best scenario. You're obviously going to take advantage of it if it's better. And for testing purposes, every single one of these has the exact same media installed into the library. And so, for example, if we just do some examples, let's take this one here. This is the AV1 file. This will be playing on the MSA1. If we just sort of play this one here, this looks all good. And if I actually go down to the bottom here, you'll see that I've changed the quality here. So this is actually transcoding already from my earlier testing. And if we click the playback info, you can see here that the transcoding is taking place. Now, if we actually head over and have a look at the MSA1 here, you can see that the CPU usage is down at 0.7%. You can see the commands here for Jellyfin trying to do the transcoding. So all of this is taking place on the iGPU. So yeah, the MSA1 with the 610M can decode and then re-encode in real time AV1 material. Now, for example, if we were to duplicate this, let's try playing it again from a different place. Now this one is still going, this one is still going, and here we can see that the CPU is now spinning up another transcode, but basically this thing isn't really touching the CPU at all, and both of these are going to be running absolutely fine. We can also have a look now again in this settings, and we can see that it's transcoding again. And then if we duplicate again, I don't know how many times I'm going to do. Like I said, this isn't necessarily the most scientific way at all. It's not very scientific at all. But we can see here that we've got 3 videos all going from AV1 into, I assume, either H.265, and all of that's being done in real time. So, as I was saying before, it's probably just not as cut and dry now that Radeon are so far behind on Intel. Sure, this looks terrible, I know. We could probably up the quality. Let's put it to say 1.5. Yeah, that looks much better. And again, it's transcoding. All of these are transcoding. Why don't we change them all to 1.5 at the same time? This all looks pretty snappy. And even doing this, it's showing that basically almost zero CPU usage on the MSA1. So let's have a look at something which is probably a bit heavier. So if you remember, we can have a look at this 4K movie here. So this is 4K H.265. You can see 4K HEVC. Now, if we play this one, and we head down into the settings here, I'm automatically transcoding this as well, dropping it down to 1.5 megabit per second. And if we have a look at the MSA1, here you can see again, just 5% CPU usage here. But again, I don't suppose we're going to have any issues with just kind of duplicating this out, playing lots of copies of this, which is going to fire up multiple transcode sessions. We should be able to do this in real time. So let's start really taxing this. We've got one playing here. We've got another one playing here. And hopefully in a few seconds, we've got another one doing here. Usually it has to kind of buffer and do a certain amount before it actually plays. But all of this looks to be going smooth, all transcoding 4K H.265 in real time. Now moving on to the MSA2, this has got the 610M. This is a much less powerful GPU. If we try and play the AV1, this looks okay. Let's have a look and see what's going on here. Yes, we are transcoding. So if we pull up the MSA2 this time, here we can see that we're hitting around 2% CPU for this. And if we just start duplicating this out, again, if we have a look here, we're barely scratching the CPU on this device. All of this is being used through the MSA2's. Even that small iGPU is able to do all of these simultaneous transcodes. So let's go back now. Let's try it with something that's probably going to be a little bit heavier. We'll go for a H.265. Let's go for the Big Buck Bunny on this one. And we're going to be downscaling this one as well. So this one, the quality, let's put it to something like 10 megabit per second. So this should be a bit better quality. Now again here we can see that this is actually really hitting the CPU to begin with, but now again it's back down to sort of 1.3%, basically idle. If we duplicate this, let's play another one, and let's duplicate again, and play another one, Now if we hop over into the CPU, we'll see that initially we get a big spike and then it kind of settles down. And now all of these again are transcoding that H.265 to a lower quality bit rate, and they're all doing it in sort of real time. So if you're thinking about using this for a Plex server, you're going to get at least 3 transcodes going at the same time from 4K, which is awesome. Now, I don't know what the actual limit is on this. There's probably a better way to test it, but I've shown the raw throughput, plus I've shown this working with Jellyfin. Moving on to the N150, which is probably a device that a lot of you are interested. Let's try doing the AV1. Now this does support AV1 decoding, so it should be able to play it without issue. And you can see here already we are transcoding. We can move that around. You can see here again that the CPU is barely sweating. Now one thing I found useful for the Intel iGPUs is we can use Intel GPU top to measure it. Unfortunately I tried with Radeon top, but both of these newer Radeons don't seem to be supported. The project seems to have been abandoned about 4 years ago, so I can't show you the actual GPU usage. That's why I was showing you the CPU. However, on here, though this is the B-Link, we can look at the GPU usage. So if we change the quality on this, here you can see that it's about 70% busy whilst it's doing that rendering. So now if we duplicated that again and tried to play, say, another one at a different resolution, you can see now that this B-Link is getting a little bit slower, but it still seems to be okay. But here you can see we've now got 3 simultaneous streams going on, all trying to transcode it. They are all playing, which is great. So it does go to show again that even something like the little N150 is probably going to be good enough for most of the tasks that you want to put your few users using Plex or Jellyfin at the same time. So on the same device, if we use something like H.265 at 4K, this is now transcoding this video here, this larger file. So if we start to duplicate this tab and we play another Big Buck Bunny, this time let's change it up to a different resolution, a different quality, and see what happens. You can see here that it is a bit slower now. So let's put this one at 6. Let's duplicate it again. Let's see if it can handle 3 simultaneous 4K H.265 transcodes. So this one looks to be playing. This one's still actually buffering. This one I can't even get into the menu yet. And let's put that one to 10. If we hop now over onto here, you can see that the GPU is getting hit pretty hard, but actually it's sort of transcoding and doing 3 at the same time. So that's 3 4Ks at the same time on an N150, which is pretty awesome. And so finally, here we are on the Geekom. This is using the 13900HK with the older late Gen 12, so basically the same as the Intel MS01. Let's try those same tasks again. So we'll start off with the AV1 file. Here we can see it's playing and it's hitting that GPU straight away for transcoding this down. So we're putting this down to the 420 kbps. If we duplicate this, we try it again. We can try it with now a different resolution. Let's go to something like the 720, and then let's duplicate and let's try and do all 3 at the same time. Let's see if we can get that working. So we'll change this one to 1.5. Here you can see the GPUs getting hammered now by both of those, but it's able to transcode and play all of those at the same time, which is pretty awesome. So let's try and hit it with a 4K H.265. So we'll play this one. We'll put this one into, say, 10 megabit per second. We'll play this one and we'll put it into something slightly lower. So let's put that one into 8. And then let's try this one again and we'll put it in something even lower. So there's 4. Here we can see the GPU's getting hit pretty hard, but again, it's already done the caching. We're already watching 3 simultaneous transcodes at the same time. So I think it's fair to say that the Intel one is probably slightly quicker. The quality looks good as well, but there's nothing wrong with the AMD one either. So what did we learn from that unscientific test? Basically that I think the old paradigm of always buying Intel is probably not the case anymore. I think from my testing that the QSV, the Intels, do still have the edge, and they probably do have better compatibility and support, which is definitely something that you'll want to factor in. But if you're looking for something like just simple Plex transcoding, Jellyfin transcoding, etc., Make sure you check the codecs, i.e. the encode and decode, but provided that's all okay, it looks like you're going to be able to use pretty much any modern iGPU and have at least a few simultaneous transcodes going on. So you could have multiple users in different places, all using this iGPU at the same time, which is pretty awesome. Probably the two standout things from this video is that the B-Link N150, that really cheap device with a very budget CPU, was able to handle this pretty well. It wasn't as snappy as the other devices, but once it got going, it seemed to be fine. And also the MS-A2, which I know there's a lot of people interested in, a lot of buzz, and it's well known that the iGPU isn't as good as the MS-01, but it still seemed to be performing okay. There didn't seem to be any issues with what was happening on my screen. And even so, if it did have to go back to the CPU transcoding, even if CPU transcoding was on it, it should be able to handle a couple of transcodes because it's got a monstrous CPU in there. Now, just to spell out before I wrap this up, this wasn't the most scientific test, but I think it was a decent real case use example of what people are going to be running in their home labs. I'd be interested to hear about other devices below, other iGPUs that you've used, and what kind of performance you're getting from them. Are you able to have multiple transcodes, etc.? Anyway, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit that subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. Take care, everybody.